All right, so I think I'll begin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the first part of our conversations on the Ezhi-gashiwing Deniiwan speaker series. My name is Erin Szikora, and I'm the co-curator of Mamano Pikas Kwiwina, Mother Tongues Dish with One Spoon Territory. Mother Tongues is presented in tandem with the touring exhibition Like the Winter Snow Kills the Grass, The Summer Sun Revives It, which is curated by Missy LeBlanc, organized and circulated by Truck Contemporary Art, and currently on view at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. This exhibition tackles the deeply personal complexities of Indigenous language revitalization and features the work of 7 Indigenous artists making work in and about their mother tongues. As the exhibition moves across the country, Missy has set an intention for each of the host locations to engage with the local language communities and their revitalization efforts. The Oshawa iteration of this project, Mother Tongues Dish with One Spoon Territory, was co-curated by myself and Missy and developed in consultation with local artists, elders, language teachers, and community organizers from across Durham region and beyond. And I'm so excited today to introduce you to 3 of the folks that I've had the great privilege of speaking to throughout various stages of this project's development. Before I introduce our speakers, I first want to acknowledge that the RMG is in the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. This land has been the traditional territories of the Mississauga Anishinaabe since 1700, before which it was stewarded by various communities belonging to the Haudenosaunee and Wendat confederacies. This land is presently covered under the Williams Treaties and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement and continues to be home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island today. In recognizing the land in which I currently uninvitedly occupy, I also want to recognize that I'm zooming in from Toronto on Treaty 13 territory, where I've lived for the last 8 years. Further, I'd also like to acknowledge the digital territory in which we're all joining in from today. As we continue our conversation, I invite you to type in the chat box below where you are joining in from this afternoon. I also want to thank our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts and the Ontario Trillium Foundation for their support of this project, as well as Missy LeBlanc and Truck Contemporary Art for trusting us with this exhibition and framework. Before we begin, please note the chat box and Q&A features both at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for our speakers today, I ask that you please type your questions into either of those 2 boxes. And if you're having any technical issues, please also let us know by typing into the chat box below, and an RMG staff will be happy to help you. The way this event will be structured is that I will first introduce our speakers and allow them to tell us a little bit more about themselves, followed by a few questions I've prepared, and then I will open it up to audience questions. So as you're listening to the speakers, just make sure to type any questions you might have into the chat box, and we'll come back to them near the end of the event. And so with that, I would like to introduce our first panelist, who is Matthew Stevens. And Matthew is a member of the Southeastern Ojibwe Nation located in Southern Ontario. He is of the Bear Clan and works closely to preserve Ojibwe culture through songs, ceremonies, and the protection of natural systems within his traditional territory. So Matthew, to get us started, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your relationship to your language, and explain the work you do at Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation.
Bonjour. Bonjour, Canada, Maganadak. Anim Kisin de Shakas Makwagin Dorem, Shanyang, Devon in Juba, Minwadash, Chickenebek, Zebing, Nagidaya. School am Nising de Ananokian, nēhiyawēwin Awe. Greetings, my relatives. My Anishinaabe, my spirit knows when is Little Thunderbird. I am of the Bear Clan. I come from the place of the calling, federally understood to be Georgian Island First Nation, as well as Rama. We call it the place of the calling, and it's on our beautiful lake, Wawasea-Zigaganing, the shining lake. I do work for a neighboring community, the Mississauga over at Scugog Nising. And I guess just briefly, I'm still learning. I still have the rest of my life, I'll be working towards the language. I was fortunate enough when I was young, was able to hear some older generations, but like many people, this wasn't, especially with my parents' generation, like they all grew up in households, like all my grandparents, they all spoke fluent. That's what they spoke amongst each other. But amongst their children, they would switch to Ezhi-gashiwing. So we were able to, as little kids, hear it. But going forward into our lives, our mode of thinking has been shaped by English, has been shaped by the world that we saw. And so I've been working on a personal level to kind of flip my brain around. A positive note, while I'm not fluent, I'm getting pretty good, I guess you'd say, at engaging with the earth and learning the spiritual nōswinan of our plant tree relatives, our relatives out in the forest. And I'm happy to say that my little guy, he's 5 years old. He's having access to things that I didn't have as a little boy. So I think there's progress happening in that regard. He knows, I'd be confident to say he knows 30, 40 plants, and he knows them all in Anishinaabemowin. He knows their original name, if you will. So I see some positive changes. There's a small group in Skugog that are pretty dedicated, that are working really hard towards revitalizing their language, picking that up. So grateful to be here, and I hope we all have a good day.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Next, I'd like to introduce Laura Grier. So Laura is a Dene First Nations artist and printmaker born in Yellowknife and raised in Alberta. Through the use of traditional print mediums, they instrumentalized the power of the handmade to language, culture, ecology, and indigeneity. Responding to lived urban Dene experiences and displacement through print, Laura's work is also inspired by the dynamism of Indigenous art practices and uses printmaking as a tool for resistance, refusal, and inherent betsine. They hold a BFA from Nascad University and an MFA from OCAD University. They've exhibited most recently at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, X-Space Cultural Center, Harcourt House, DC3 Art Projects, and Snap Gallery. Laura has received grants and awards for their work, including Indigenous project grants from the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, Toronto Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts. They currently reside in Toronto. So Laura, I was wondering if you would be able to tell us a little bit more about yourself, your relationship to your language, and explain your use of language in your art practice.
Hi. Yes, certainly. Hi, everyone. As Erin said, my name is Laura. I am currently in Toronto, and I'm originally from Alberta. But so today I'm going to just show you some images first, and I'll try and be really quick about it. But I'll be able to show you a little bit more about my art practice, my research, and my art practice as it integrates with my research of my Dene language. So I'm just gonna screen share. Oh, yeah, there you go. Hello, so this is the image you saw, I think, just on the promo. And I guess I'll just start with this because it's one of the first works I used with my actual research. And it's made from stone lithography, which is my primary use for printmaking, and screen print. And these words came from a text by Karen Rice. And it's mostly Dene Sulene, which is a text called Our Language is Very Literal, Figurative Expressions of Dene Sulene. But it was one of the only texts that I found that at that point in 2018 that had direct translations of words. And Deniiwan is fairly similar to my dialect of Satu, which is Bear Lake. Although the dialects are completely different. So there's like 5 or 6 different dialects within the same region of Dene. And Satu Dene are located in the fly-in community of Delaney in the Northwest Territories. And it was like one of the first pieces of work that really ignited this love of language and the poetic sense of it. And it translates to directly, I arrived on Earth, and then the actual translation is like, I was born. My mind is in the wild, and which means lonesome. It circles around, which means wilderness. And ground I start to move there means I am aging. And my breath is blocked, meaning there's a lump in my throat. And a lot of the work was me translating this idea of obviously like this cycle, which is what I picked up from reading from that direct text. And just to give you a little insight on what stone lithography is, it's a printmaking grease-based process that uses a litho stone that the best way I can describe it is that while you use greasy-based product, it kind of captures that mark and you etch it with nitric acid and gum arabic, and then you're able to print with it. And this is work from my MFA that was a research into how like relationality with the stone is able to create this collaborative work to translate like my realities and this conversation I was having with the stone, and it's very performative. And each of the works has poetry written with kind of like acts as poetry with the works, but to me it also acts as like your description or your artist statement replacement. And again, I'm gonna like speed through here. So these are just some of the like notes that I was doing this past year when I was able to get a hold of texts by Karen Rice, again, called Grammar of the Slave, which actually had Bear Lake dialect translations, and it basically breaks down the language. And a lot of that research was actually also made with my late grandfather. So I found that was really interesting while I was reading that what I'm exactly looking for is actually a biological relative of mine. And it's like, they're like this thick, and there's like four texts of this research from like the 1980s up. So it was a great amount of time that it took to try and go through it. And I am not a fluent speaker at all, but the more that as I go and do this research for my artwork, I am actually starting to be able to capture like visual recognitions. So I feel like I'm slowly actually really starting to learn it. So I'll recognize that one part of the word means this or them with like an actual like verb. So this particular notes was from me researching a word for care. There, with the conversation I was having with my biological uncle, he mentioned that there was no word for care in Bear Lake, especially not the sense that I was thinking of. And I went through all of these words to try and find this word for care with the resources that I had available for me. And since I was able to have like a grammar textbook, I was able to create a word and use it for this exhibition. And I made a word that basically says your heart's mind. So like, what does your heart's like mind think of? Yeah. And this is from like the exhibition where I had a bunch of handmade paper printed with woodblock print of all of the words that I went through to get to that word, or words that could be considered for care. Like bego te enito means loving. And it's one of the words that I don't have a direct translation. So like bego is a general sense of like me or he, she, or like they even. And then te enito means I have no idea. So like these are things that I'm highly anticipating to be able to have direct translations for. And just to show you some of the work that I was doing at the RNG, there's a series of handmade block printing pattern prints made from everyday objects and having the words accompanying the description of these objects. So I used everything from like tampons, underwear, takeout containers, pads, and was able to kind of either create a word or find words that describe these things. Like, yeah, they're very fluorescent. It's one of the funnest works I've made. Yeah, I think this one means uterus blood cloth. Yeah. And these are just the examples of the physical like handmade work carving that goes with like the type of work that I do. So it's quite laborious and very therapeutic. And it just means a lot more that I'm hand carving something and working with it versus just printing it, because I have a lot more relationship with the wood and the words and the images more so than I would if I used some other process. Yeah. And right now I don't have very many, like I'm still ongoing research on the Bear Lake dialect, and I hope to be able to have more access to documents. But there's really a lot of interesting resources that I came across. Like there's a specific Delaunay dictionary that I use quite often, but that dictionary doesn't have, again, like the literal translations of things. I also use an app. They have an app that is able to like, let's see. So that helps a little bit with my pronunciation as well. Yeah, I can talk more about all of this stuff later, but for now, that's what I'm up to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. We're so excited to have your work currently on view at the RMG. So when our doors reopen, I invite all of you to come see Laura's show. And yeah, we'll definitely come back to a lot of those conversations. So thanks for sharing your work and sharing images. But next, I'd like to introduce our final speaker on our panel today, Melody Crowe. Melody is a Mississauga Anishinaabe woman from Alderville First Nation, which is located on the south shore of Rice Lake, Ontario. She has dedicated her life to creating a deeper understanding and appreciation of First Nations culture, knowledge, language, and history, and has more than 25 years of experience teaching the Ojibwe language to children, youth, adults, and elders. She works from the place of honoring her ancestors and honoring the importance of Indigenous peoples and ways of knowing. In 2007, Melody received the Lifetime Achievement Award for her work in the preservation of language and culture from the Union of Ontario Indians. And in 2015, the Honoring Our People Award from the Ogi-Mahawi Tribal Council. Melody is also an eagle feather carrier, a jingle dancer, and a photographer. So Melody, welcome. And I was wondering if you would be able to tell us a little bit more about yourself, your relationship to your language, and explain the work you do in language education.
Hey, miigwech. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here and to be a part of this panel. And so I just say miigwech for inviting me to take part. And so I'll introduce myself just to say Anin Bojo, Melody Ondag, Anishinaabemowin, Alderville First Nation, and Dunjaba, Michasagi, Anishinaabemowin. So just that my name is Melody Crowe, and I've lived on the reserve of Alderville all of my life, as did my mother, as did her father, and her mother was born in Hiawatha First Nation. And so our family, go back to right all those back through history, all the years that Alderville has been here since 1837, I believe it was. So yeah, I'm just very proud of our ancestors. I'm proud of our beautiful culture, that rich culture that we have. And from the time I was a little girl, that's just something that always I just had that love for that. I had love for that and passion for that. And I had the blessing of being raised, growing up in the home of my mother's mom and dad, my grandparents. But they just naturally, were in more of the roles of being a mom and dad. I called them mom and dad, and I had my own mother. So it was like I had two mothers, and because my grandmother was just a natural mom. And so that was kind of how I got to have a strong foundation, really, in being so rooted in our family history, our community history, those connections as well through Hiawatha. Mom, taught me about connections to those ancestors and family members, and she had the language, and so she started to speak the language and teach that language to me as my first teacher. And she passed away. I was only 10 years old, so I only had those 10 years as a little girl with Mom, the grandmother, Lucy, and so I'm so thankful that I was a little girl who wanted to pay attention and hear those stories, because like to have that short amount of time, and yet I feel like that set my foundation for my future. And the same with Dad. Dad was the chief of the community. He was also a trapper. I went out on the land with Dad, and as that little girl, went out on the lake fishing. All those things, I had the opportunity to do that. And so I guess throughout my life, I just really followed that passion of wanting to learn about our language. And then one of the last fluent speakers that we had in our community, his name was Bill Bigwin. And I really, he was a neighbor of ours. And so as a teenager, I would really also reach out to Bill. And, I was asking him all kinds of questions. I'd ask him everything under the sun. How do you say this? And how do you say that? And Bill was a really good teacher to me in that way. And sometimes, to teach me that not everything can be translated as such. And so I just continued on in desire to keep learning. And I did have the honor, of being asked to teach classes in my community from a young age in my 20s. And I had two teachers as well from Curve Lake First Nation, and that came to our community and taught the language. And so they just all seen that, seen that passion, I think, that I had for that, and that commitment. So I've spent many years of my life, as part of my life's work, sharing what bits I know in that strong foundation of that language. And I've had the privilege, of teaching all ages from those children, as Erin said, all the way to elders, because there's so many, in our community as elders who didn't get to have that language because, you know, that there was that interruption in language through history with the residential school system, and in such a drastic, severe way of the intent of you know, stopping that language. So I'm proud to be part of you know, that work of keeping that language going, and there's, you know, young people behind me who are going forward in good ways as well with that. And so, and I also, in my life, I work as the First Nation Education Liaison with our Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board. And I've been in that role for 21 years at this point. And so I'm a resource in that sense, right from kindergarten to high school, to all staff and principals and vice principals and so on. And in that role, you know, I get the opportunity to, you know, to tell stories, to teach some of that history, to speak about our beautiful culture. I've supported the language programs that are run throughout the school board as well, you know, in some of our schools where our First Nation students are part of, and also non-Indigenous students who take the classes. So I really led a life of great commitment, I guess, to wanting to keep those things going, to make that change, to have our voices heard, to keep that language alive. And one of the things that I always say, because there's so many, you know, what we didn't get to grow up learning the language as such, and so there's a lot of people who feel bad about that as Indigenous people. They carry that as you know, like some of them feel really bad that they don't have the language or know the language. And so for me, anyone, you know, that I get an opportunity to teach in my classes over the years, I always just want to empower that any little bit of language that they know, to speak that, you know, whether that's a handful of words, just to speak that language. And you know, because I would rather to see that than, you know, I don't want people to go around feeling shame for not having grown up with the language, because so many, as I say, in our community, not just our community, many of our communities out there are Anishinaabe communities in this area. You know, everyone had the opportunity for that. One of our beautiful elders, who she's now in her early 90s, but when she was in her 80s, she always said to me, you know, she always wanted to learn some of the language before she passes away. And I had the opportunity. I was brought in to get to do some, you know, just some of the basic phrasing and words and things with a group of the elders, and that was really lovely, because you know, she shared that how much in her 80s, how much that she'd wanted to do that. And so I just feel really blessed in that regard to have been supported all these years. Throughout those years, you know, I began teaching the language in a night class in 1991, and still, you know, do that throughout the, you know, sometimes it's a fall and winter course, but it's like it's a night class as such. And so, you know, I've had opportunities to teach many people, and in the pandemic, was the very first time that, you know, I did it over Zoom. And it was an opportunity for so many of the off-reserve members to take the language. And it was wonderful. Like I had a class of still some people from on reserve, but I had so many, the majority were off-reserve members of my community. And so it was wonderful to see like a mother and her adult daughters and grandchildren and sisters, and you know, and people, you know, from all the way out to the west coast of Canada, who are members of this community but live elsewhere. So that was really nice for them also to make those connections and have that, you know, have that connection. One of the young people in that online class, you know, is a great niece of Bill Bigwin, who was that person when I was a teenager who I looked to, you know, our last fluent speaker. So I was able to share with her, you know, in making those connections, you come from what, you know, one of the last very strong fluent speaking families. And so, you know, so just making those connections is wonderful. And so I guess I just see myself in the work that I've done in that life's work as is just being that support, you know, having the opportunity to teach that, you know, to teach some of that language, to empower and support, you know, and just really encourage that every little bit of language that you know to speak it, and to be proud of that, and not to feel anything less than because of not being fluent, you know, because I know there's that that feeling sometimes of not being fluent. And it's like, but like I say, I think in these times for us to keep that language going, it's just so important to empower and, you know, so that we have that, you know, that our young people coming up behind us, you know, are learning that. And the children are getting language classes in the school and daycare. And that's a wonderful thing too. So that's a little bit about what I do and the opportunities that I have had and continue to have. And so I'm just really, really very thankful. And it's lovely, any opportunity to get to talk about that. And so being on this panel with Laura and Matthew, you know, as speakers, I'm just very honored to just engage in, you know, in those folks that have signed up to hear this talk. I'm very thankful for everyone to be interested. And so I just look forward to engaging in more of this talk, Erin. So miigwech.
Thank you so much, Melody. It's so great to hear more about the work you've done. And yeah, it's amazing. Just thank you so much for your commitment to a lifetime of teaching and supporting Indigenous folks. So I'm wondering now if Laura and Matthew can turn their videos on, and I'm going to ask some questions and we can just go from there. And also, as a reminder, if you have any questions at all for any of our speakers, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll get to them soon. All right, so thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourselves. That was really great to learn more about yourselves and your practices and your relationships to your languages. Something I've been thinking about is, which, you know, has been driving a lot of this project, is just the question of why, and the question of how much knowledge is carried within these languages, and just the urgent need to sustain them. And the United Nations has just declared that 2022 is going to be the first year in the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. And there's a worldwide push, an urgent need to preserve these languages. And I was wondering if any of you would like to speak to just the value that language carries, and the reason why we feel it is so important to teach it, especially to our younger generations, and empower folks to learn and pick up their language. So if anyone wants to just jump in there, feel free to just take yourselves off mute and we can have a conversation.
I'll go ahead. I'll just jump in, and then I'll just for a minute, and then the others too can add to that. But that's a wonderful question and a wonderful thought, because you know, that language holds that worldview, and you know, like through our languages, that's, you know, like what holds that philosophy, the way of looking at the world, you know, those values, and so much is captured in the language. And one of the examples I like to use, there's lots of examples, but when I've answered a similar question to that before, and I like to use even just that word for a rainbow. When we think about that word for a rainbow, nēhiyawēwin. And, you know, and we've all seen that rainbow, you know, in the sky, and that nimki is the thunder, and the nēhiyawēwin is a necklace or a scarf. And so that becomes the thunderer's necklace. And so, you know, like, which is a beautiful way to look at a rainbow, right? And you think that's the thunderer's necklace. And then you think about, so, you know, and just like I shared in just a few minutes ago there, when I was that teenager asking that fluent speaker, you know, all these questions, and he'd say, you know, sometimes you can't even translate things. So it just holds so much a way of thinking, you know, it's like a way of thinking, and that connection to the land, you know, so much land-based knowledge. And you think our ancestors were on the land for thousands and thousands of years, and how much knowledge came from that. And so that's one of the things I just want to start with, putting that out there, is terms of how much it holds, the language holds. And you know, and it's just not always, you know, exactly what it means in English. You know, like one of the teachings I was given even about that word medicine, mashkiki, you know, strength from the land. Know, like that, you know, so it's beautiful in terms of how we can look through that lens through a language, and how that teaches us about a way people see the world and value those things.
Yeah, thank you so much. Matthew or Laura, would either of you like to comment on that?
I could go. Yeah, I fully agree. It's really hard to actually, when you look, if you were to go and search, there's no real consensus on how many words exist in the English language. And we do know that it is an amalgamation, if you will. It's a collection of different European languages put together to create this new, it's pretty much, it's like the baby language of the planet. And I remember being at ceremonies once, and one of our Nick Deliri, we were outside and we were talking, and he was telling me all sorts of really amazing things, talking about showing me things in the stars and sky world. And one of the things he brought up, he said, you know, about how how would you put it, how the perception of who we are is so limited. We're always made out to be very primitive, not very sophisticated, if you will. And he said, and we know as an Anishinaabe that that's not the case. And he said, you know, in our language, Anishinaabemowin, there's approximately 5,000 known verbs. So our language is a subjective language. It's very different than this English I'm speaking, objective. There's always an object, and then we use our adjectives and our verbs to describe that object. But as a subjective language, there's always something happening. There's movement. There's a spirit, he says, in our language. And so he said, our elders know there's about 5,000 known verbs, and we have approximately, if I remember right, I can't remember if I get these right or wrong, but I believe that the prefixes, there's about 25 of them, different things you can add to the beginning. So just from adding the prefixes, you get well over 100,000 potential words that you could say. And then on the back end, you can add another 23 suffixes to that. So when you put all that together, you get well over 2 million potential words that you could say in our language. And so, like I said, there's some varying, there's a dispute, if you will, of how to perceive the English language, how you classify the amount of words, ranging from a couple 100,000 words to even 1 million. But even if you took all of that, you know, is the word, you know, words that we've adopted from other languages that we use in English, are they actually English words? I would argue no. But we know that the Anishinaabe, and I use Anishinaabe, our Dene relatives, I use that as the indigenous people of Turtle Island, that these languages are the most expressive languages on the planet. And so the risk by losing these languages that we face as humanity is the ability to express ourselves as humans, the fullness of what we could express as human beings. And so it's kind of overwhelming when he told me that, I was like, oh, okay, so I'm going to spend the next, 50 years of my life trying to learn 2.5 million words. Like, that's overwhelming. But I think it speaks to the complexity, the beauty behind me, and this background I put up. That's Nimki Ajbekong. It's part of it's a very sacred place to us up north, and our language is, they say it was given to us by creation. Creation gave us this language. It was a way for us to express our life as human beings, as Anishinaabe people, interacting with all that exists. So anything that you would find, any action that would happen within the eastern woodlands of Turtle Island, we have a description for that. And so that's what I think is beautiful about our languages, and that's one of the main reasons we need to preserve it. As Zigos Melody just explained, it shapes our worldview. And when I said that earlier, I have to flip my mind around, because my mind in English, when I try to express something, it's backwards to the way Anishinaabe people would view things. And yeah, so I think it's just a beautiful thing, and it's definitely worth preserving.
Yeah, thank you. It's so, I have a lot of admiration for fluent speakers or speakers who are able to pass on a lot of things that I don't have access to. So like being south and urban, the communities up north, I don't have access to like classes, and I don't have access to speakers, which is that a lot of Indigenous languages, it's very experiential. So like you need to be in it to kind of really not like know, they get to know it more. But I've been really interested lately in like through my research in creative art and language, is that my Indigenous language, though like many, are again like what you both said, is it's founded through thousands and thousands of years. And I'm interested in how like creative artists are able to have these complex ideas and works, and that English tends to fail to even talk about or describe some of that work because they're based off of Indigenous realities or knowledges. So like what would the language be able to do for that work? Like it's almost like this inherent way of making is also this inherent way of wanting to express or translate things. It's like I want to be able to see how I'm able to see through the eyes of my ancestors is through the language. And that is something that really excites me, is like it's like one word could mean a very specific sentence that either describes something or like not actually the object itself or the function around it or the feeling around it, or just like the visual. It's a visual based language, like I said. And I want to see that more, like how my language will be able to uncover some of these things, but also that the language is continuously growing and it's alive. Because for Dene, the common like example is that it has adaptive. It continues to grow. And so like an example like French. So when French settlers came up, they had words for things that they didn't have, right? So there was objects that they were introduced to that they've never seen before. So, or like things that they were expressing that they never had to think about because there's different ways of communicating and living with one another. So like my uncle told me the translation for white people is mola. So he says that mo means round and la means hand. And it was very interesting. And he thinks that when the people saw the white people, that they had rings on their hands. So they think that that's what he thinks is that it was, they would see round things on their hands. So that was really interesting. So I am interested in helping that grow, even though as a like non-speaker, and I have constant questions of like, what is my right to make this work? But I see a lot of Dene youth also having this similar struggle of like this urban living and this, they don't have access to this language. So I also want to dream of the possibilities of the language. Like I want to see words that maybe they don't quite have for like queer realities, or like urban like realities that are very complex, but they can be imagined in so many possibilities, like through that language. So yeah, I don't know.
I think that's really important, Laura, what you're saying too, you know, and I think that's why it's like, even when you shared that app, you know, like, I think that's so good that there's ways that are like how things are being adapted for younger people and of the times of today to be learning in ways. Because I think, you know, like, one of my longtime mentors, Murray Wheatung of Curve Lake, passed away. It's been a year. It was a year ago, I think, in November now. And you know, like, and so in losing him, it's like that was who, you know, who I would always go to you know, do some work on translating or whatever it would be. And you think about when we lose those speakers, and we lose those that have that knowledge of that land and knowledge of those teachings, like they all, so much goes with them, right, as they pass on. And so that's why it's so important for us to encourage you know, younger folks, all of our people, but you know, those younger ones, to learn and to feel that it's their right to. And you know, because you know, I've had some interactions with you know, like I said, through the Zoom session, some off reserve members, you know, and I think it's important that they feel that's also, it's their birthright too. So like you're saying, Laura, you know, being in urban settings, but it's still that Indigenous right to have that language. You know, those ancestral languages are our birthrights. That's how I feel. I feel like that's our birthright, to have those languages. And so I think that's why, you know, like in hearing about different apps, I don't have those and know how to totally go about those at this time yet. But those apps are important, things that are going to work for the younger people, you know, and social media is such a big thing, and all those apps and things. So I think that's really important that, you know, young people are able to use that in ways that they will use it and feel like they can learn. So I just wanted to add to that.
Thank you, Melody, and all of you. Something that I think keeps coming up, and something I've been really interested in throughout the you know, development of this project, is the ways language teaching and learning has been impacted by the pandemic. And you know, Laura and Melody, you both touched on this, but having language classes, you know, no longer be able to gather in person and community was, you know, the first issue. But then it opened up a different realm when folks were able to join language lessons virtually. And I think due to that push to digitize, a lot of language apps have been coming out. And I've been seeing a lot of young people sort of have a new interest in language learning because it's becoming more accessible online, particularly if they're, you know, displaced urban folks who don't have access to their reserves or their community members. So in thinking through that move to the digital, I'm curious of what you all think of what are the conditions needed for a language to thrive. Melody and Matthew, both being speakers who are living within your community, and Laura, someone who's displaced, and what it looks like, or sorry, I'm interested in what that looks like and what language learning looks like and what we need to encourage learning.
Well, within our communities, so back home we have my older aunties. They can actually understand it pretty well, but they don't really use it. And we have, I would say, less than 5 left. And they're all up there. We have one elder, he's like almost 90 now. He might actually even be 90. He's fluent first language speaker, but he says he forgets because either there's nobody there for him to speak with. Some of the other elders that they may have either moved on to the next world, or they may be not living on the community. And so that's kind of that's the challenge. Like when I go up north, like I spent a lot of time growing up north, and so it's a little bit easier up there. Um they're almost like a generation or two behind. So I'm second generation removed. So like I said earlier, my grandparents, that's what they spoke to each other, just Anishinaabemowin. Then my parents, they were shielded. It was encouraged, you'll have a better chance at a better life. You don't need this language. You can just speak English. And so, like I said, some of my older aunties, they remember more because they were a bit older, and had more access to the generation. And so I see that even starting to shift up north when I go up there and visit some family up that way. Um, they're about a generation behind. So some people of my parents' generation, they're pretty fluent. Um, but what I do see happening within the community, so I spent a couple summers ago, I spent some time up in Wickwam, Konsing, and they're fortunate because of population. They have a huge unreserved population. They have a lot of fluent speakers. They have enough where the older generations, people over 40, 50, that's generally they'll speak Odawa to one another, or Anishinaabemowin with their version. And so the revitalization is a little bit easier for them because they have so many resources. Down here, like I said, we don't officially have really any teachers in the community. We have a handful of elders that can fluently speak, but the one thing that was pretty interesting is one of our elders, he actually was forever, he was of the same ideology that, you don't need this, it's no good for you, it's better to just learn English. And as he's getting older now, he's actually starting to reach out to some younger people. He wants to actually start to transmit teach some of the things he learned as a kid, the language. But there's these gaps. And so there are people who want to pick it up, but we're always just getting like little pieces. It's really hard for us to implement, even on reserve. It's hard for us to implement the full-on language because we're not immersed in it. You may have one or two people in a household that may be learning the language. Generally, you probably have one person, and they don't have anybody to speak with. So for me, I think one of the things that's been really good is I consider myself like a baby, like a child, in my learning. And the awesome part is having a little guy, having a little son. I basically put myself on the same level as him. And so by working together with him, we're sort of on this language journey together, little games. We play I Spy all the time in Anishinaabemowin, and it really helps me like to learn. As with him, he picks it up organically. He doesn't think about it. For me, I'm really trying to, like I said earlier, switch my mind around. So definitely I noticed the same thing. We actually have a teacher from Melody's community, Sarah Beaver. She's helping us in our community. And since the pandemic came and online virtual language classes, it's really increased our ability to, as Melody mentioned earlier, like we have members as well from BC that are tuning in, that are interested in learning the language, but never really had access. So I think the possibilities, technology will play a big part in the reclamation. You think of where we're heading with these metaverses and virtual reality. One thing I spoke about with one of my friends was, how amazing would it be if we had a virtual world where people could log on with VR, if you will, and they're in an old village. And people who log on, we have fluent language speakers, and we could actually spend time immersing ourselves in the language from our own homes remotely, because we don't have access to do that unless I move up. And that's one of the things I'll end with this. I have an auntie, she's from up north, so she speaks a little bit different dialect. I don't know, I don't really try to focus on dialect so much. She speaks the language. Her people up there, our relatives up that way, they didn't really shorten it, so she speaks more of like the full enunciation, if you will. And that's one thing I'm working towards. I'm working at building a house on my own community. And I told her that, I said, when I get my house built, I would love for you to move in with me. You won't have to worry about don't worry about anything, any kind of bills. All I ask is just speak Daga Anishinaabem Toshin, so speak Indian to me. And so that's kind of a strategy I have. I know people, for learning, they have to be immersed in it to really start to take it to the next level, but I think we'll be able to do that going forward with technology.
Melody or Laura, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Okay, well, I'll go and then sure. And then yeah, that's wonderful, Matthew. And yeah, and Sarah is a wonderful young teacher, and I always feel really proud of Sarah. So that's lovely. And you know, I was thinking when Matthew was speaking about, you know, that idea of, you know, hearing speakers online, and one of the things I've noticed too in the pandemic has been I've gotten to log on to so many sessions and just various talks and things with Anishinaabe people that I wouldn't have gotten to see, you know, who are up in Wickwamacong, or who are, you know, like you know, but they're being brought together as speakers. And you know, I'm going to get to log on to a language conference in a week's time, you know, through the Assembly of First Nations. And so it is like, so it has broad opportunities to do this, like, you know, just what we're doing. And I've just been blown away at that opportunity. Even when those graves were, you know, the unmarked graves were starting to come out in the news, and there was a session, and hearing some of the, you know, some of the survivors and folks that I've known and looked up to, but getting to see them on here on the computer, where I wouldn't have gotten to see them or hear them in that same way. So that's another thing that it has brought in terms of this connection through the internet and these kind of sessions. And then just quickly just add on too in terms of those classes. So I guess it's just important, and in our community and in our communities close by too, like, you know, I know there's always initiatives, like we've had initiatives over the years, like, you know, through the Healthy Babies, Healthy you know, Children program, even running a class for parents and the little ones, you know. So there's lots of things like that, or you know, like my style of night classes, and with the kids getting that, you know, in the daycare, in the school. We have an after school program. And again, they are always trying to incorporate that and having the kids introduce themselves and talking about the clans. So, you know, just doing our best, you know, because those, you know, we are smaller communities who don't have fluent speakers. And Curve Lake First Nation, you know, out of the 3 of our First Nations in this particular area, like of Alder, Hiawatha, and Curve Lake has, you know, they have a lot of, you know, still a lot of speakers that a person can go to. But so I guess it's just all those efforts, you know, but I have seen how good it has been, you know, being able to hear talks and to connect with Anishinaabe elders and speakers and all of those things in this past while.
Yeah. For conditions to thrive. I mean, it's a couple of things. It's money sometimes, right? Like when we were having a conversation, and like the documents I had to get, like the only documents of Karen Rice's volumes of grammar weren't accessible really in North America. So the only volumes that I found in full set that were in fairly good condition and together was in like Oxford in the UK. Cost like $900 just to get. So there's those things. But there's like, I'm finding that there is more and more funding for artists and creative Indigenous projects. And that those grants, like they can be used for creating these apps. Like there's so many people that I know that know these knowledges of like creating apps, creating podcasts, social media even, or even just YouTube, like those are quite accessible things. They can be paired up, and like that's like the people that are making like such podcasts, like their whole goal and dreams is to be able to speak with these fluent speakers, and it's absolutely possible to keep pumping out such resources to gain a lot more momentum for youth and people possibly that are isolated to gain such like access. It's really great, but it's also like through the work of making spaces within institutions better. So like the work of many people who are working in schools and universities to create like certain sets of rules and bylaws, and basically attempting to decolonize their institution so that these colonial barriers are set aside, so that people have this safe environment to not only like learn, but to explore and imagine. And like those are the things that like are going to help change things so much. Like this virtual reality of being able to speak with these elders or friends or like native speakers, like that's possible. I want to see that. Let's like do that. And those are the type of ideas that are like very exciting to me. And like as someone who was just on this cusp of like, I've been to different universities, although there aren't universities, but still like, yeah, I had to go through a lot of institutional barriers that are even like from early education that are set in like very racist things, and like being told I couldn't even like go to community college because I didn't have any grades to do so. I was like put in special classes and like middle school, and surprisingly, not surprising, all of them were native. To me, applying to like PhD courses right now to explore this creative research on language. So it's having now like being like pushed through it, like education, even like for me was really important to not only like prove to people that this is like something that's possible, but to also like help people that were like me, that were absolutely just like struggling internally or even just in general through these institutions, because it's hard. It's not fun. It makes you question a lot of things. Like I have a lot of people, like maybe younger folks, who are just like telling me like, is it worth it? Like it's killing my creativity. It's killing like anything that I came here with. And it's really hard because like yes and no, depending on what you want to do. So that is something that I always wanted to try and do within institutions like schools, is to help the many people that are trying to just create that space. Because yeah, when you hear these ideas from so many different people, it's so great. Like there was one person that was just in my like etching course, and like they were probably in their 70s or 80s, and they've never set foot in the building. They've never even been to the studio. They have never done printmaking at all, no courses, and they just dove right in. And the type of work that they made was the most exciting thing we've ever seen. Like, it was like you need to, like, I want to like buy this work. Like, this is the type of work that is needs to be like out there. So yeah, I don't know. It's the futures and possibilities are looking a lot better. And yeah, like social media, so it's great. Like I'm finding like YouTube channels of Dene speakers, like I never could have dreamt of having just clicking a button and having someone be able to pronounce something that I saw in a textbook, but I actually now understand how that word was made and how it's said. Like it's completely different from like the Roman like translations, like so like the Roman orthography is pronounced, like things are just pronounced entirely different. Yeah.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I think it's so inspiring to hear you speak about your journey with language learning in school, and the very real trauma associated with navigating through these institutions. And you've done that with so much grace, and I think it's really inspiring. And I also, when you were talking earlier about your printmaking as it relates to word making, I think you in your practice are helping break down some of those barriers by creating words that young queer Dene youth can use to help express their experience in these institutions, and to help express what pleasure looks and feels like, and what just living a good life that is different. And I think that's really exciting that you're doing that work. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing a bit about your story. So we have about 20 minutes left. So at this point, I'm interested if anyone in the audience has any questions. If you do, feel free to type them into the chat box, and I can read them out for our speakers. They can be questions, for an individual, or that I can pose to the whole panel. But yeah, before we do so, I was curious if any of you three have any questions for each other, or if there's anything that you'd like to go back to and speak more about. Yeah, Melody.
I just wanted to say one of the things that, and I wasn't sure if Matthew is on that committee or not, but there's the Mississauga First Nation, under the Mississauga First Nations, there's a working language group meeting every month. And, some of us as reps from each of our communities. And so that overall goal is to, put together as many resources and supports for the language. So that's something that's being done across our Mississauga First Nations. And I know Scugog's part of that. And I wasn't sure, Matthew, if you were on there. I wondered if I knew your name from there or not. But that's something that, so they're just wanting us to, anything that can be put together so that can then go out, and be something long-term, as like whether that's dictionaries or ways of teaching, different, like using flashcards or all kinds of ways. And so that's something that's a good, that's something that's ongoing. And I'm just really pleased to sit on there with, the various folks from our Mississauga First Nations. And that's something that we're all part of.
Yeah, I was there. I missed the last 1 or 2 meetings, but I remember when former Ogama Keith was there and he was speaking. I was at that meeting. Yeah, I remember seeing you there. Yeah, it's definitely, I think the resources are like the first step. Like it gives us a bit of a foundation. One thing that I think it's just a little comment, is one thing that we'll forget, or it's not really focused on in the history of Turtle Island, the history of, we'll say, colonization, if you will, but the founding of what we see today is the Wemtago and the Jaganash days. There was economic value. I think it was mentioned a bit earlier. There's really no economic importance put on the preservation of Indigenous languages, but in the early foundation, especially during the fur trade days, the Dutch, the French, the English, they actively learned our language because it was of economic importance. They had to they had to know how to speak to us to acquire all the goods and services that we were providing. So if it comes down to an economic, and this is one thing too that's really disheartening, is the amount of money that gets put into the official languages of Canada. There's a dollar or two that gets put into Indigenous languages. And so that was one recommendation I had before. It was slightly different. I helped my auntie. I supported my auntie. She was one of the key speakers at some of the first missing and murdered Indigenous women meetings that were held in Ottawa. This was years back. And I was fortunate enough to speak, and I spoke to those representatives from the UN. I said, simple fix. I said, all this economic, this energy, this money, this development was put into destroy our family unit, our languages, our worldview. Why is it like, why can the opposite not be done? Why could we not make Indigenous languages? Maybe it would have to be regionally because there's so much diversity, but why can they not be accepted official languages of these territories? Why can the same amount of funding not go into, like, why can we not create schools? I know that the Onwehonwe, the Haudenosaunee people, they have that in various communities. They have their freedom schools. And when I lived with them, I lived with the nēhiyawēwin people, the Mohawks in upstate New York. And it's a truly sovereign community. It's one of a kind. I've never seen any other community, even unceded communities that we have here in Canada, never seen anything like it. And the amazing part was, my cousin, he has a couple of children from there. They're half Anishinaabe, half Mohawk. They went to the school, and I don't even know what the inside of the school looks like, because literally, if you do not, there's only one language that's spoken inside of that school. In order to walk into that school, you need to be able to speak fluent Ganyage or Haudenosaunee, nēhiyawēwin. You have to speak their language. If you don't, you don't have a place in there. And so I know that's, to some people, maybe that's a little extreme, but the benefits of that is all their people, they all speak their language. They hold their council in language. They do all their tobacco offerings in their language. They have their ceremonies in their language. And so the strength that you can see from that and those efforts. So yeah, I fully agree. Resources are incredible. They really help give us the foundation that we need. But I think it's we could, instead of having the onus completely on us as Indigenous people, there should be some systematic changes that would help encourage that. You look to New Zealand, the Maori language as an official language. You're going to work in a bank in New Zealand, you're going to have to know how to speak Maori. That kind of incentive and reminder of the value of that would go a long way. Oh, nēhiyawēwin.
Laura or Melody, do either of you have responses to that? And if not, I have a question that I can ask. So it's up to you two.
Yeah, I think that like funds, I think it just speaks for like the whole mindset of this country. Like, not only is there not Indigenous languages that are like even remotely promoted for whatever like industries within, but it's also like accessibility. So like that's not even something that most institutions think of. So that's something that even we're not even at this one stage where we have this access to the various Indigenous languages of different regions. We also don't even have like general languages for accessibility. So like sign language, like I learned sign language for like a full semester, and it's quite lost already because it should be a universal language as well, but it's not really still. It's not enforced. It's maybe slowly, but like there's things that I think of like where this is like the absolute funds and research put into like Indigenous sign language. Because yet, like, that's something I also I struggle with as a visual artist, is thinking about my work becoming more accessible for those who have visual and hearing like impairments or struggles. And like there's just things that I also think of, just get really sad, I guess.
And I've always felt the same about those official languages. I've always struggled with that my whole life, you know, it being between English and French. And I've always just struggled with that. And so I just, I'm of the same mind as well, just in terms of, especially when, you know, like our Indigenous people are the original peoples of this land, you know, like, and I know there's a great diversity amongst our Indigenous people all across Turtle Island. And so there's a lot of languages, but I do just think, like, you know, we're the original people of Turtle Island of North America. This is the homeland, the original peoples. And so to me, that just, you know, there should be a means of those languages being recognized. And I do want to just quickly say that, you know, I want to, you know, put out that thought to ourselves and to those that are listening, in terms of the pride that that we need to feel as those Native people, as you know, in terms of you know, what was done historically through residential schools. When you think they went on for over 100 years, over 150,000 Indigenous children going through that system, you know, and what that did to language and culture, and you know, it's like for us to be here talking about language, to having this passion for language, for it to be being shown in exhibits like Laura's, and all these different ideas, and all those things that and there's so many of us, you know, that are out there in our communities, on reserve, off reserve, you know, and all across this land, doing the same kind of work, feeling the same way, and feeling strong and proud about it. So I just want us to put that out there, that like that we need to feel that pride that we are a part of this, and that, you know, and whatever role we've played and continue to play, and put those ripples out there, that our language is still going. And that's why I always say, like, speak any little bit of language that you know, even if it's a handful of words, it keeps that going. And to be proud of that, you know, to be proud of that. So I just wanted to add that in, Erin, I hope that's okay, because I just think that's a really important thing when we're talking about, you know, as part of what we're talking about, really, because, and I think that shows the resilience, you know, that resilience that, you know, even though, like, you know, some of our communities, like, we're down to, like, you know, almost no, you know, like in not all communities, I'm not speaking for all, of course, but where we are, you know, not all having that many fluent speakers left, and how important and crucial all this is, but also to recognize that we are still here and contributing so much, and that language is still here.
Yeah, thank you so much for adding that, Melody. I think it's true. It's really exciting that there's so many folks really interested in doing this work right now. I know within my generation, I see a lot of excitement and engagement with language learning, and I think it's just really exciting to see. So I have a question from the audience, and that question is, what is one word from your language that you want to share with everyone on the call today?
I have some. There's actually 3, and these are like just 3 words that I have categorized as my favorite words, which are funny. One being like lete te ole, which means bread is floppy, which is the translation of pancakes. Or sate means bear is burnt, which means black bear. Or dene che means man is angry, translation old man. That's my words.
Well, I'll stay in line with the old man. I love this word, nēhiyawēwin. Nēhiyawēwin, caretaker of the earth, speaks to responsibility. Everything about us is about responsibility. We have a responsibility to ourselves, to our families, to our communities, to the earth, to the universe. And so the understanding of like to become an old man back a long time ago, you would know every process from all those decades of being out on the land. You would know how things were supposed to go, how things were supposed to flow, and you would actively take responsibility and to ensure to help those things, whether that was maintenance, cleaning the forest, transplanting of seeds, even the collection of beaver. If too much almec in a certain area are actually negative for the ecosystem. People talk of beavers as very good, which they are, but we keep them in balance. And then the other word I really like, I'm Bear Clan, so I'm a little biased, but noka. So we say makwa. Makwa is the black bear, misabe is grizzly bear, but noka is like the spirit of the bear, and but it's really the spirit of tenderness. And so that's an interesting point too, because we, generally speaking, a lot of people have this perception of bears as these terrible, frightening things. But in actuality, if you understand the relationship that and the responsibility that bears have within the earth, like right now, they're praying on behalf of all of us. They're inside of the earth right now, fasting on behalf of life, fasting on behalf of the earth. And when they leave in the spring, each one of their tracks, generally speaking, probably be in the snow, maybe into the soft earth. Each one of those is a prayer that goes in, shoots into the earth and pray. They're praying on behalf of all of us. So I always shake my head when people are like, "Oh my God, it's so scary. I can't, I would never want to see a bear in the forest." Like that to me is my relative. That's my auntie, my uncle, my cousin, my sister, my brother. And so the last word I like, widase. Widase is a very old word. It's not seldomly used. It's actually it's a chief's name back a long time ago. Widase is to protect in a non-violent way. That's what that word sort of speaks about. And so I really love that word as well, widase. And yeah, anyway.
Okay, one of the words I guess that kind of jumped into my thoughts, and especially hearing Matthew connect that to the land and the importance of all of that. And in my work, that's one of the things I love to connect the children to is, that connection to Mother Earth and the land. Ake is that land. But nebe came to my mind, that water. So I guess, that's a good message too, that nebe is that gift of, that's that life, like water gives us life. We couldn't be here without that. And so I guess, that would be one of the words that I would want to share is that nebe. Because I think we just, you turn on the tap, it's there. And yet when we think about even water issues for First Nations peoples, all of those things, and yet we could not, I always say that to the kids, could we be here without water? Could we be here without air? And so, again, going back to those teachings from that earth, that ake, so ake, that land, nebe, that water. And then I was thinking too, that word bazindan. Bazindan is a word to listen. I mean, like bazindan, like listen. And I think one of the other things, just as part of that, the teaching of, in terms of that hearing, that we're all taking this in, but there's a difference between, just hearing and really listening. So I guess that's what I wanted to tune that to, that intentional listening. So yeah, and miigwech, of course, miigwech meaning thank you. There's lots, I'm sure there's lots more. Those are ones that just came.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those words. That was really great to hear and learn some new words. If there's no last minute questions, then I think we'll be wrapping up, unless do any of you have any last minute thoughts you'd like to share? Any words of advice for any language learners in the audience?
Also, one thing that I was thinking, I just want to share quickly is kind of the responsibility aspect of it. I've been thinking a lot. I was thinking even last night. I was actually fortunate enough. We had a ceremony which was really needed, and driving home from that, I was thinking, I don't know who it was. It was maybe I was online. It was YouTube. It was someone speaking, and they were talking about if you want to be an expert at anything, dedicate an hour a day, and within 5 years, you'll be well on your way. And so that's something that I've been. I even spoke with Nishime, Sarah, said that, like, I really have to take this serious, because she was encouraging me. She's like, you're pretty good, like you're better than you think you are. And I was like, I'm having a hard time piecing it all together. Like I know a lot of words, and I know a lot of names of things and some actions, but to piece it all together, it's just, she's like, no, give yourself more credit. And so that's one thing that I'm hoping to do. Not hoping, one thing I will do is dedicate my efforts. I see in people that I know that started as English speakers, they really put that effort in. So that's one thing. And then also, just quickly, a long time ago, Jagete Ogimog, like Jake Thomas Ba, he's a Nottaway, that's what we call him, the Haudenosaunee. He was a Haudenosaunee, a traditional hereditary chief. He's gone now, but he, as his responsibility as a traditional hereditary chief, he had to know all the 5 languages of the 6 nations, but he had to know Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk, all those different variations of those languages, or the same language, as well as an ancient language that's most people, they're very few. The Tutelo is another group of the Haudenosaunee people. And as well, he was fluent in Anishinaabemowin. So we think of that, we remember the past, that our leaders, especially our chiefs that had to go and talk amongst other nations, like, in order for me to be a chief in the past, not only would I have to be fluent in my own language, but I would have to know Mushkegowin, I'd have to know Cree, I would have to know the Haudenosaunee languages. So it's, like I said, get back to responsibility. And anyone, we can learn anything if we put the effort in. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. Anyway.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, that's really, I think it's really inspiring, just the dedication that language learners put into this work, because I know it's difficult, and it takes a lot of commitment, and a lot of folks are doing this work on their own. So I really applaud anyone who, as you said, Melody, even just knows a handful of the words in their mother tongues. I really respect that. If there's no other further comments, I just want to thank all of you, all of the speakers, for sharing your wisdom with us today. I am so grateful that you were all able to join us, all of the participants, to bear witness to these amazing stories and these panelists' knowledge. I also want to quickly plug that there's going to be a part 2 of this conversation. That conversation will be held February 12th, which is 2 Saturdays from now, at the exact same time, so 1 to 2:30 EST. And that one will be moderated by Missy LeBlanc, the co-curator of this project. And the panelists will be artist Lacey Burning, language teacher Sarah McLeod Beaver, who Matthew and Melody spoke very highly of, as well as Dr. Elder Shirley Williams, which I'm very excited to hear speak. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I really hope you join us for that next session in a couple of weeks. So I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and thank you again. Take care, everybody.